Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Estate Expectations podcast. I'm Elizabeth Pickle, and today I have a very special guest. Before I introduce her, I'll tell you a little bit about the topic. We're going to talk about legacy planning for your pets. And I have a feeling that this is going to be a really popular episode because for many of us, our fur babies are like our children. And, sometimes I still get the chuckle when I talk about pet trusts or pet planning, but it's a serious estate planning issue because we want to make sure that if anything happens to us, that our pets, our beloved fur babies, are taken care of. So, without further ado, let me please introduce Lana Shapiro of Foothills Animal Rescue in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Hello.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. It was very easy for me to make the decision around who I was going to invite onto the podcast with respect to planning for pets.
Thanks.
Yeah, very, very easy because, I tend to go back and forth about, who's truly the expert here in this arena? And, who have I established a great relationship with that I trust? And you are obviously top of mind all the time.
Oh, that's so kind of you.
Well,
thank you very much.
I'm a truth teller. So, I've known Lana for quite some time now, and so I know all about her and her fantastic organization. But I'm going to pretend as though I know nothing because I want you, the audience, to really understand who she is, what she has accomplished, and her organization, what they do. And so go ahead, Lana, if you don't mind, and tell me a little bit about how you got started and what you do to offer pet legacy planning services for the public.
Sure. So I am the Director of Development and Marketing at Foothills Animal Rescue. We're located in North Scottsdale. I've been in the nonprofit world doing development and marketing for about 8 years now. So large nonprofits, small nonprofits, I've kind of done a little bit of all of it. But my true passion is in animal welfare. And so coming across, and I've got a background in investment finance as well. And so estate planning is part of all of that. And that's where I kind of got my groundwork and understanding of how estates, on the investment side, but understanding how estates liquidate, distributions of estates. That's where I've got all my groundwork knowledge from. And it was a very easy transition from the investment finance side to then have discussions around pet planning and estate distributions and how to plan your estate in the best possible way.
Yeah. And I think that is what really sets you apart from other organizations. And I'm not dissing other organizations, of course, but that's what really sets you apart. And that's what really came to mind when I first met you, is that you're not only an expert in understanding and dealing with the emotional bond between owners and their animals, but you're also well-versed in proper planning, and then knowing any of those potential challenges that are faced by individuals who are maybe coming to the end of their life or planning for end of life. And they are, sometimes my clients, they're quite terrified about what is going to happen to their pets more than their own kids, right? Their own children.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they can't really do it themselves. So it makes sense. And yeah, that happens quite often, is that the pets are kind of the second thought, or, if they don't plan for their pets, their family, it's something that they have to deal with almost immediately. They have to figure it out. So if you don't have those plans in place, they go reach out to shelters, pretty immediately if they can't find placement right away. So unfortunately, it is just part of daily sheltering, and even at at a shelter or a rescue, we have to deal with these situations, and they're very sensitive situations for sure.
Of course they are. Of course they are. And so I know that you're familiar with pet trusts, and so and you're also probably very familiar with the fact that we didn't always have the ability in the law to create pet trusts, because there was always this concern over the enforcer of the trust or the beneficiary of the trust not being a human. And how could a animal actually enforce their rights as a beneficiary? But nonetheless, that was legislated over the years, and we now have this ability to create these pet trusts. And so do you have experience in working with the trustees and facilitating these pet trusts?
Yeah, so I have had just a few experiences on the animal welfare side of dealing with pet trusts. They're a little trickier when you're as an organization to handle pet trusts because there are those every organization in animal welfare, if you're a shelter versus a rescue, those organizational types are not always situated to be a good representative of a pet trust, or being a residual beneficiary of a pet trust is very different than being a trustee of a pet trust. So understanding those differences is really important when you're setting a pet trust up. But there were a few instances where people have set up pet trusts naming the organization that I was working with. And that just gets really, really tough and sticky for us on the organizational side. But they're still great vehicles, and you should set them up. It's just when you're considering doing so, understanding what the capacity is for an organization versus an individual is definitely something that you should be talking to your attorney about.
That's very well put. And so let me just briefly explain a little bit about how a pet trust works. So what the trust does is the trust holds the assets or the money for the benefit of the animal. And the trust is then managed by a third party known as the trustee. And so there can be a trustee who manages the money portion of the pet trust. But then we want to also plan for, well, who's the guardian or the caretaker? And I think that's where your organization would come into play. There could be a trustee who receives direction from the trust to connect with Foothills and then make that legacy donation. And then you are given the care in the custody and take care of the pet. And then I want to know more about your role in the home placement services, because I know you're very intentional. You don't just rehome animals. You're very intentional about how you find suitable homes for pets and their ongoing care.
Yeah. So at Foothills Animal Rescue, very specifically, we have a program where we, because we're a managed admissions rescue, which means that if there's space available, we can take an animal in. But with a designated gift associated with it at Foothills Animal Rescue, we will guarantee intake, which is not something that we always do. As a managed admission shelter, we can't always take in animals, but with a designated gift, we will guarantee the intake of your animal to be rehomed. So I just want to make that very clear, is that we won't intake an animal to care for it for the rest of their lives, but we will guarantee the rehoming.
Right.
And Foothills Animal Rescue is notorious for having great retention rates for our adoptees. That means that they don't get returned most of the time. We've got a great retention rate for that. And we're very, very diligent about placing the right animal in the right home that is suitable for not only the animal, but for the adopter as well. So we have consultations with all of our adopters. Every adopter has about an hour consultation with us, and we go over what the animal is like behaviorally, what if they have any dietary needs, what we've observed. We at Foothills Animal Rescue are very, very lucky that we know our animals very well. We've got volunteers and our staff know these animals so well. We know their behavior. We know what they're like. And if the animal had an opportunity to be in a foster home, those fosters know those animals so well that's exactly why we have the retention rate that we do for adopters. So anybody who is looking for a rehoming, if they don't have somebody designated to take care of their pets after they pass and are interested in our program, there is a designated gift that is associated with it. And prior to making that commitment, we always recommend that they come and talk to us first and foremost to let us know, who are we talking about? Are we talking about a cat? Or are we talking about a dog? Are we talking about horses? Because we don't do horses. It's very nuanced, and understanding the pet before they come to us is essential for us to be able to then make the appropriate placements afterwards, because typically at intake, if there is an owner surrender situation at our rescue, there's an extensive interview process, not necessarily an extensive one, but we try to gather as much information prior to them being in our care from their previous owners. And so in this situation, we would want to do the exact same thing.
That's so impressive. And let me say that when I first started creating pet trusts for my clients, we'd have the deep dive into their estate planning intentions. And, my client would say to me, Liz, I have 3 dogs and they're much older. And they need to have a good home, a quiet home, a peaceful home. And again, this is me being brand new to the concept of pet planning. I would say, well, just leave them to your kids. And they would be horrified. And they would say, no, I can't leave them to my kids. My adult children have their own children. It's a circus in their house. There's running around. There's other pets. There's cats. My dogs will fail to thrive. It'll be harmful for them.
Yeah.
And this is the great thing about being an estate attorney. You learn from your clients. You really learn about, the important questions to ask. And that was one that really caught me off guard. And I thought, you're right. This really has to be a mindful decision. And again, this is why I'm so impressed with the time that you take to learn about the home, and then making sure that the individual, as you mentioned, that they're going to keep the pet. There's a very low likelihood that they're going to return the animal, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, we try to match the adopter with the appropriate animal, right? Every adopter kind of comes in with their own expectations or, what they have in mind. But if we don't have an animal that really matches that, we will just be very upfront with them and just say, like, we don't know if this would be the right match for you. And again, having that conversation with the owners prior to something ever happening, understanding what they're looking for, understanding what their animal needs are, is crucial for us to be able to make sure that they're getting placed in the right home afterwards.
Absolutely, absolutely. Have you ever come across any issues with enforceability issues? I guess I want to ask about if you have a will or a trust, and there's a trustee or a personal representative that calls you up and says, "Hey, you were nominated, or you were noted in the will or the trust as the caregiver." And you didn't know. You were caught by surprise. Does that happen sometimes?
That happens a lot. That actually happens quite often. We are pleasantly surprised most of the time that we are beneficiaries of a will or a trust. It's typically not a bad thing. But, more recently, we have come across a situation where we were unaware that, and luckily these people have not passed yet, and that we did get in contact with them, but there was a situation where we were just unaware of a previous arrangement made by a previous CEO that we were just unaware. We were unaware of how many animals they were expecting us to care for, and what those situations and stipulations were, because things weren't documented, or things were documented on their end, luckily.
Yes.
But we on the receiving end didn't have that information saved from the previous CEO, unfortunately. So we had to kind of look at the documentation, and it was already agreed upon. And as an organization, I can't change a previous agreement. But had we not known in that one particular situation, these amazingly wonderful, generous people had 17 cats in their home. And they're very well taken care of, very, very well taken care of. And again, these people are still alive and still have the relationship with Foothills Animal Rescue. And, some have since passed, so the number of animals has decreased. But the stipulation was that we would care for these animals for the remainder of their lives. Capacity-wise, right, as an organization, we are set up as a rescue. We're not set up as a sanctuary. So understanding those stipulations and what the capacity is for us, our organization is a rescue. We're not an open admissions shelter. We don't really have the capacity to hold on to animals for the remainder of their lives. Our agreement is to rehome, and these people, we've had that conversation separately. We just don't have the capacity to do so. An animal sanctuary absolutely has that capacity, right? That's what they're set up for. Open admissions shelters will take your animals regardless. There's no saying no to any animal that comes into their doors. What we at Foothills Animal Rescue are not capable of doing is taking in an animal that we can't physically touch. If they are so terrified, if they are so stressed out that it is a danger for us as humans to touch them and retrieve them to bring into us, that's not something that we have the capacity to handle. Animal control, on the other hand, does have that. Does have those abilities and has those liabilities that they're definitely capable of handling animals that are in those situations. But if we can't safely manage your pet, it's not a good placement for us.
And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that it's important to be clear about your services, what you can do, what you can't do, and that way we can empower our listeners and our potential clients to make the best decision for them and for their pets. And so, would you say that in a perfect world, the estate planning attorney, the pet owner, and you and your organization would all work together in collaboration from the very beginning on whether or not this is an appropriate placement. Essentially, you'd like to be in the know from the get-go. Is that fair to say?
In a perfect world, yes, that is exactly what I am saying. Yeah. In a perfect world, it's best for the organization to know what they're getting themselves into Absolutely. Prior to actually getting the animal in hand. But I also think that conversation also needs to be happening if you do have individuals who are set up as, in a pet trust as a trustee or a caretaker of your pet, because those stipulations and the conditions of your pets change over time as well, understanding what they might be getting themselves into. A year from now, your pet might have diabetes or have a heart condition that might need extra care, right? So understanding all of those stipulations, having that relationship, a continued relationship. What I ask all of our donors who are, going through our legacy pet program, is that they stay in touch with us. Mm-hmm. Stay in touch with us. Let us know what's happening with your pets, at least at the bare minimum on an annual basis. And at the bare minimum, if something unfortunate happens and your pet crosses the rainbow bridge, please let us know. We would love to know. We want to support you. But more importantly, we want to make sure that we're keeping promises that we can keep.
Yes. Spoken like a true estate planning attorney. I always say to my clients, please, no surprises. Now is end of life is not the time, excuse me, to surprise your beneficiaries, your trustees. Everyone should know the plan. And I think, especially back in my parents' generation, we'll pick on them.
Yeah.
The topic of estate planning, wills, creating a will, transferring assets and money was very secretive. My father I had no idea how much money my parents had. It was not discussed. The planning was not discussed. And it was literally a surprise when someone passed away. And then there was this reading of the will, right?
Yes,
Which we don't do that anymore. Good gracious, thank goodness. But it was a surprise. And it's really doesn't seem to ever be a welcome surprise. So with my clients, I obviously get their permission to bring you in as a party. And why wouldn't they want, obviously, to interview you and talk with you and share with you all of their concerns and the needs of their pets? It just makes sense. And for you listening, ladies and gentlemen, when you create an estate plan, you deserve a team, a collaborative effort with a team who has your best interests at heart and will do everything in their power to make sure that your plan will go exactly according to your wishes, right? So I'm sure you have a lot of stories and real life scenarios that you could tell us. Maybe some nightmare scenarios, things that didn't go so well, versus some stories where there were some really touching, heartfelt, positive results out of the planning process. Do you want to share a couple of those?
Sure. One that comes to mind is actually a little bit more of a positive one. A lady, I believe, from what I recall, she was single at the time, had no kids. She had passed, assigned a pair of her friends, a married couple who had some pets of their own, knew the pet very well, decided to, this lady decided to name her two friends as the beneficiaries of a lump sum of money to take care of her pet. And it was just kind of like an outright gift. I don't know for sure if it was specifically designated in a pet trust, but I do know there was just like an outright gift.
Sure.
That was associated with the pet to be able to take care of the pet. Unfortunately, because of their animals and the pet, they weren't cohabitating very well. And they had to make a really, really tough decision to rehome the pet. And as part of that process, they brought it to the shelter that I was currently working at, and said, hey, we really need your help rehoming this pet. She's a great dog, but she can't live with us. And we thought she could, but she couldn't. And, losing her pet owner.
And kudos to them
it was a really tough decision for them. They came crying, and it's not uncommon for people. And it was one of their best friends. Ugh. It was their best friend's dog, and they didn't want to give it up.
Absolutely.
But they had to. They were in a predicament where they really could not care for the pet anymore. And they said, hey, we got this really great gift. We would like to give it to the organization if you can rehome it. And you just need to promise us. And at the time I was working at an open admissions shelter where we did unfortunately have to euthanize for space. Luckily at Foothills Animal Rescue, we are a no-kill organization, and we don't have to do that. And we have the luxury of not doing that. But at the time, this situation turned into an opportunity for us to really find a really great home. And we did. And we ended up doing so. And this couple transferred their outright gift to the organization, which was great for us. But we just wanted to do the right thing. We just wanted to do the right thing. And it wasn't, and again, I don't think it was in necessarily a pet trust, but on the counter side where it kind of went wrong, was that there was someone who had put a pet trust together and named this organization as a trustee, unknowing to the organization, that they would take the pets. I believe we rehomed the pets. But every year we had to put a report together to the trustee about, so as the organization, we had to continually follow up with the adopters, which isn't typical of an organization. We don't usually have like a regular reporting, where we had to kind of issue a report of, is the pet still alive? What is the condition of the pet to the trustee? And the trustee and the adopter were in two different states, and we had to coordinate this on a yearly basis. And again, for the organization, I personally don't believe it was worth the gift amount. I don't believe that it was fair for the person who had named the organization to set it up that way, because it became a hassle.
Of course, sounds burdensome.
And it's not, and we, there was no way for the organization to actually know if the animal was still alive. If we, because the adopter was in a completely different state, we just kind of had to take their word for it, which isn't, it just put us in a weird situation. Absolutely. And so I just really hope that people can take away, like, when, it's different when it's an estate that it's a one-time distribution, and you're done, right? Or it's a residual or a reoccurring distribution that happens on a regular basis that doesn't necessarily coincide with a living thing.
Yes.
So when it comes to something that is living, and I'm sure you deal with this with like dependents who have handicaps or lifelong, needs, disabilities, or certain financial needs that are reoccurring.
Yes.
The same thing happens with pets, right? Yeah. They're living beings that have needs beyond just a one-time distribution or a one-time liquidation. So just being really cautious of that is an important aspect when you're planning for that.
Right. So again, a perfect example of making sure that all parties are on the same page from the start. Nominating a trustee who is not already in contact with the organization, and then just springing this all on everybody when you pass away is not the most effective way to create the plan, and it can be certainly detrimental to the pet. And you brought up a couple of fantastic points that I want to elaborate on just for a moment. The pet trust has the connotation that it's going to be a lot of money that's being held in a pet trust for payments over time. Pet trusts work really well for equestrians, horses, right? They work really well for breeders of dogs and cats. They have a lot of dogs, a lot of cats, and so a pet trust may or may not make sense for your particular situation. But you mentioned, Lana, the outright gift. That is also a great option. And if you don't need a pet trust, if you'd like to just leave, a $30,000, $50,000 gift to Foothills, for instance, that is a one-time distribution. There's no oversight by a trustee. It's just the gift given directly, and it is not managed by a trust. And that seems to work well for a lot of people. And the other thing I just wanted to say is that always feel as though you can rehome a pet. If you are left a pet by your friend or your family member, and you try your best to give that pet care and a good life, and then suddenly for some reason you can't afford the pet anymore, or the environment just isn't a place where the pet can thrive, do not ever feel badly.
No.
Right? And that's exactly. So I love that you made those 2 points. And so I certainly could talk about this all day. But in terms of kind of wrapping up this episode, I kind of want to summarize, have Lana summarize the key takeaways and the significance of really seeking professional guidance, and then how you can also make a donation to Foothills if you are so charitably inclined. Let's say you have pets, and maybe you have people in your family that are going to take care of your pets, but you don't have any human children, and you are very charitably inclined. Could someone make a straight donation to your organization?
Absolutely. So in this particular program, our Pet Legacy program, we have 2 different options. We have just an outright gift. Foothills Animal Rescue in particular. I don't want to speak for other organizations because other organizations have their own rules and programs. But we at Foothills Animal Rescue only accept outright gifts. We will not be a trustee on a pet trust. We are more than willing to be a residual beneficiary of a pet trust, but we will not be the trustee on a trust. And our organization, again, just to reiterate, it is a rehoming program. It is not a sanctuary program. Additionally, just as any charitable outright gift, having the conversation with any nonprofit organization, I highly recommend having them be aware of a gift in an estate, just period. Just so that you have the conversation around what those funds are going to be used for.
Yes.
We can go into a whole nother podcast about charitable giving, which I would love to be a part of.
And we just may do that. Let me take notes here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Charitable giving in and of itself. There's whole nuances, about just charitable giving through estate plans, right? Mm-hmm. Having the conversation with the organization. If it is just an outright gift, do you want it specifically designated to one program or another? Yes. Do you want to make sure that the organization will do right by your funds? Is it a CEO decision? Is it a board decision of what those funds will be used for as well? If it is not associated with the Pet Legacy Program in particular, an outright gift can be used many different ways. And not all organizations are created equal. Not all nonprofits work the same way. Not all of them do the accounting the same way. So vetting those organizations, vetting what their programs are, and vetting how your funds will be used is also really critical, and documenting it all so that your money is being used the way that you want it to be used.
And bingo. And that's always the goal. That's always the goal. That's fantastic. Tell me briefly, I know that you have a great little shop, or it's like a gift shop or a boutique associated with the Foothills Animal Rescue, and where those funds are spent.
So at Foothills Animal Rescue, we have 2 resale boutiques. We accept clothing, home goods, furniture. 100% of those sales, 100% of the inventory there is donated to Foothills Animal Rescue. And we have 2 stores, one that is located in North Scottsdale off of Pinnacle Peak in Pima. The other one is up in Carefree, Arizona. So it's a little bit more north, but those both of the stores sell all donated items. Mainly it's clothing. So 100% of the items are donated, and 100% of the proceeds go back to funding Foothills Animal Rescue mission to save lives through rescue, care, and adoption of homeless cats and dogs.
Oh my goodness. So I know y'all out there have some clothes. You have some things you could donate. It's just such a pleasure to have you on this podcast. And I think that I would like to, in a future episode, we'll do an episode on charitable giving, and maybe we'll have a couple of other guests in different areas of charitable giving.
Yeah.
And we would love to have you back. Would you be willing to come back?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you inviting me to the podcast and talking about pet planning.
It's my pleasure. And can you tell the audience, what is the best way to reach out to your organization?
You can check us out on foothillsanimal.org. So that's www.foothillsanimal.org. If you're really interested in the Pet Legacy Program, please reach out to me directly. My name is Lana Shapiro. So you can reach me at lana.shapiro@foothillsanimal.org. I can give you a lot more information. And again, I would just love to have the conversation. Just have the conversation with me, please.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you again, Lana. We'll be in touch with you soon. We really appreciate you taking the time this morning. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Estate Expectations, ensuring your beloved pets are cared for, estate planning, and pet trusts. See you next time.